You're listening to
DNA ID.
Brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime,
Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
It was 1977. On Wednesday, February 7th, Jenny K., a pseudonym I've given the young mother, drove back to her apartment building in Colorado Springs, Colorado. She was in the company of her boyfriend, Jeffrey R. As she always did when she had a babysitter, Jenny knocked gently on the apartment door. She liked to do this to give the sitters, almost always teenage girls, a heads up in case they were asleep on the couch or binging the ice cream. So she rapped her knuckles gently on the door, but heard nothing from inside except her miniature schnauzer barking. She knocked again, nothing. So Jeff got out the key Jenny had given him a few weeks earlier, now that they were officially a couple. He inserted the key into the lock, but paused and noted that it seemed the door was unlocked. They walked in. Jeff sat down in the living room while Jenny went to check on the kids and the babysitter. The lights were on in the kitchen and dining room, and a table lamp in the living room was on as well. The TV was on with no volume. A light in the kids' playroom was on. Jenny's boys' bedroom door was closed. The room was dark and all was quiet from inside. In fact, the whole place was quiet. Jenny softly called for the babysitter, "Maria, Maria." Proceeding farther down the hallway, Jenny noted that the bathroom door was closed. The only remaining door to the master bedroom stood open. The room was dark, but there was a bundle of covers on the bed that appeared to be a person asleep. Saying "Maria" more loudly, no doubt a little upset that the babysitter might be asleep on her bed, Jenny snapped on the light. Maria wasn't on the bed. She lay on the floor at the foot of the bed. She was on her back, and Jenny got a good look at her bare chest, the slash mark across her throat, and the blood. Jenny screamed for Jeff, saying, "Maria's killed herself." Going into an understandable panic, Jenny ran out of the master bedroom and into her kids' room. She breathed a huge sigh of relief that they were sound asleep and seemed totally fine. Meanwhile, Jeff went into the master bedroom, saw the dead babysitter on the floor, and told Jenny to call the police. She went to the wall phone in the kitchen, dialed the operator, and asked for the police. When the dispatcher came on the line, Jenny reported that her babysitter had committed suicide in her apartment. The time was 11:21 p.m. When she hung up the call, she walked toward the bedroom and met Jeff in the hallway. She asked, "Is she dead?" And Jeff said he thought she was. Jenny, who was understandably completely freaked out, observed shakily that Maria could have killed her kids. She was very upset. Jeff suggested that Jenny call her sister, and she did, placing a call to her sister Mary Lou, asking her to come and pick up her sons Dean and John ASAP. Then Jenny and Jeff paced while waiting for the police to arrive. First arriving at 5412 North Nevada Avenue, apartment 207, were officers Kohler and Erickson. Jenny let them into the apartment and pointed to the back bedroom. She said, "Maria's in there." Walking to the master bedroom, the officers saw the girl lying on the floor. Dark-haired Maria lay on her back, arms over her head, palms up. Her torso was slightly twisted. The right leg was straight with the foot under the bed. The left leg was slightly bent. Her navy blue halter-style jumpsuit was ripped and pulled down off her shoulders to her waist, but one strap was still behind her neck. Her chest and upper torso were bare. She had visible stab wounds on her chest and a lot of dried blood on her chest, stomach, arms, and throat. She had no pulse and was cold to the touch. Detective Sergeant Green arrived on the heels of the responding officers at 11:28 p.m. He thought he was called to a suicide, but after taking in the scene for himself, He ordered the apartment to be secured by patrol officers Kohler, Erickson, and Hefner. There was no weapon found next to the body. The 14-year-old babysitter, Maria Honzell, had not stabbed herself and cut her own throat. Someone had done this to her. The homicide investigation began. Maria Lorraine Honzell was born to parents Eva and Glenn Honzell on March 23, 1962. Maria was the middle child of 7 Honzell siblings. She had older brother David, older brother Glenn Jr., older sister Linda, and younger sisters Monica, Erica, and another sibling whose name I don't know. Her family lived in the same apartment complex as Jenny Kay at 5410 North Nevada Avenue, number 101. Their building was directly across the complex's open-air courtyard from Jenny and her kids. Maria's mother Eva had passed away from a heart attack on December 26, 1976, and her 19-year-old brother David was doing a short prison term for armed robbery of a hitchhiker in 1976. But even before all that, it seems life was difficult for Maria. First of all, she seems to have suffered from untreated epilepsy. She would have sudden seizures for which people knew to put a spoon in her mouth, but from the sounds of it, the only medication she was taking for this condition was Benadryl, which I don't think works. Also, Maria had been under the purview of the Youth Treatment Center in Colorado Springs for 6 months up until her death because of truancy and running away, which wasn't really accurate. She wasn't a runaway. Sometimes she just stayed with friends without permission from her parents. When she was killed, Maria was back at the local public school, North Junior High, as an 8th grader and seemed to be on the right track. Maria was described as very affectionate and personable. One counselor said that she was emotionally a bit needy. I can see why. In a family of 7 kids, with a father who was apparently a somewhat heavy drinker and a mother who had just died suddenly a couple of months earlier, it was totally understandable. But most people who knew Maria well described her as a bubbly, happy person. Her childhood best friend Kathy called her a ray of light, saying she skipped everywhere. Maria had lots of friends, but one of her closest friends at the time of her death was another resident of the apartment complex, Rhonda. 15-year-old Rhonda said that Maria's life was kind of a mess when they met, and she was trying to help her straighten it out. The two were very close, always holding hands and wanting to spend every moment together. They considered each other sisters, but Rhonda was the bossy one and Maria was the one who followed along. It worked well for both of them. The two girls tried to come across as tough and street smart, and sometimes got in verbal confrontations with other kids at school and on the bus, over name-calling and other middle school stuff, but they were all bark, no bite. To give some context to the story we're about to hear, remember, it was 1977. Maria and Rhonda were 14 and 15 years old, respectively, but they hung out with some older guys. They both had ongoing relationships with soldiers stationed at nearby Fort Carson. This was apparently not considered problematic. They both talked of marriage at their very young ages, which I guess was a result of the times they lived in. Maria, however, was not sexually active, or at least had not been until very recently in one disturbing incident I will discuss later. Just to set the scene further, Maria's murder took place at the apartment complex where both her family and Jenny lived, the Suncrest Apartments, a series of 2-story buildings encompassing 300 units. Each building in the complex was a classic enclosed apartment building with a main entry door leading to a long hallway of apartments and a set of stairs up to the second-floor apartments. Police quickly learned that there was a lot of interaction among the middle-class residents of the apartment complex. This was not one of those complexes where anonymous residents kept to themselves and quietly went about their daily lives. On the contrary, pretty much everyone knew each other's business. Teens in the complex hung out together. Adults had lots of on-site friendships and relationships, and the atmosphere was rife with gossip, rumors, and drama. For example, investigators heard reports that Rhonda and Maria had had a confrontation with a teenage boy on the school bus on the day of the murder, and it had escalated into a blow-up outside the complex that afternoon. That evening, this same boy had attended a house party at an apartment of a young woman Maria and Rhonda were friends with. Police had to look into this boy and rule out that when he left the party at 9:15, he went to kill Maria because of some vendetta. It didn't happen. This was all blown way out of proportion, but police had to sort this out. The close quarters of the apartment complex were both good for the investigators in terms of ample witnesses and various fonts of information, but also made their job more difficult, trying to cull the useless information, tangents, and red herrings, and focus on the information that would lead to what happened to Maria. Okay, back to the scene in Jenny's apartment. Detective Lou Smith arrived, felt inside Maria's armpit, and noted that it was still a little bit warm, and he noted black hairs in both of Maria's hands. The El Paso County coroner, Dr. R.W. Urich, arrived at 3:25 a.m. He pronounced Maria deceased, inspected her body, and estimated the time of death at between 10:30 and 11 p.m., a very small, specific window of time. Officer Kohler was assigned to accompany Maria's body to the morgue. She was wrapped in a sterile sheet to preserve evidence. Under her body was found an earring back, which was collected and retained. Maria's body was removed from the scene by Mountain Valley Ambulance employees Steve Miller and James Beckham at 4:15 a.m. She was transported to St. Francis Hospital and placed in the morgue at 4:32. The autopsy began at 10:57 the same day and was conducted by Dr. Urich. Maria was brought in dressed in the clothes she was found in, the pushed-down navy jumpsuit, and under the overall bottoms, white underwear. She was also wearing white socks with a black pattern which had no blood on them. Notably, the jumpsuit had no stab marks in it. The top had been pushed down before Maria was stabbed in the chest and neck. But the entire bib portion of the jumpsuit was bloodstained. No bra was found, and Maria's family later reported that she wasn't wearing one that day. Maria was also wearing 2 silver rings, a necklace, and a Timex watch. The necklace was of interest to the medical examiner, as you will hear. Maria was undressed and her personal items collected, and she was measured at 5'3", 132 pounds. Her body was covered in blood, her torso, neck, face, arms, and hands. Under the jumpsuit bottom, she also had blood on her left hip and on her left knee. It turned out Maria had been stabbed 19 times in the chest, mostly in the sternum. She also had a deep wound in her left of center throat under her chin. 3 of the chest area stab wounds had penetrated her heart, and blood had pooled in the chest cavity, which explained why there wasn't a massive puddle of blood under her body. The murder weapon was a double-bladed 5 or 6 inch long, 1/2 inch wide blade, such as a letter opener or boning knife. The official cause of death was multiple stab wounds to Maria's chest and a prominent stab wound to her neck. The manner of death was homicide. Maria had a faint ligature mark around her neck that the doctor opined about. Quote, "It is the opinion of Dr. Urich. The suspect in this case is probably right-handed and apparently held the victim by the silver necklace, a choker necklace with a bird on it, while he proceeded to stab her." End quote. The pathologist tried to manually pull the necklace from Maria's neck during the autopsy, and the necklace would not break. Instead, Maria's upper torso raised up off the table. Dr. Urich stated it was his opinion that the suspect may have received damage to his left palm while he pulled the necklace. Now, I have to say that the notes don't reflect that there was blood on the necklace or what, but the suspect did cut himself somehow, and that fact would become very, very important. Here's what was collected from Maria's person in addition to her clothing and jewelry. Dark foreign hairs stuck in the congealed blood on her chest and torso, a hair on her right forearm and a hair on her left arm. Dark hairs stuck in the blood on both palms, a hair stuck in the dried blood on her face, a 5 3/4 inch long blue fiber stuck in dried blood on her neck that didn't come from her navy jumpsuit. Several additional fibers that were vacuumed off the body at the scene and collected by CSI's Shull and Havercorn, a blood sample, head and pubic hair standards, and fingernail scrapings from both hands. Maria's underwear was sent to the crime lab for testing, but as far as we can tell from the 1970s investigative reports, a rape kit was not done. Maria was found with her jumpsuit still on her lower half and her underwear in place. The assumption was that she was not raped. Poor Maria had been stabbed so many times, and the wound to her throat was so severe. At her funeral, her throat had to be adorned by a scarf in order for her to be presentable. Back at Jenny's apartment, located on the 2nd floor on the southeast corner of the building, the main entry door opened into the living room and a hallway led to the other rooms. CSI detectives Shull and Havercorn photographed the scene and documented and collected the evidence as follows. Blood was smeared on the light switch on the dining room wall, but it was evident that the bulk of the attack had occurred in the master bedroom where Maria was found. In that room, there was blood all over the bedding, even the bottom sheet, indicating that Maria had perhaps been on the bed at some point. Here is a quote from the report. "There were numerous blood spatters observed on the west wall of the master bedroom, mainly in an area approximately 62 inches from the floor and 79 inches from the north wall. It appeared as though the blood had been sprayed in this direction. There were traces of blood spatters on all 4 walls, and also a small blood spatter was noted on the ceiling directly above where the body was lying. End quote. There was also blood smeared on the bedroom light switch in a wiping pattern. Crucially, there were blood spots observed on the floor near Maria's body. Blood spots were also noted on the hallway floor, leading into the bedroom and on the kitchen floor. In fact, there was blood in several parts of the kitchen, including on a top drawer. Quote, "This drawer contained various items of silverware. However, no sharp knives were noted in the drawer. Upon opening the drawer, it was observed that there were numerous blood droppings on various items of tableware in the drawer. It is unknown if this blood came from the victim or the suspect. The blood-stained tableware was later retained as evidence by Detective Shull." End quote. Actually, the whole top drawer was seized. There were more blood drops on the carpet below this set of drawers, and in the drawer below the one with the blood on it were 11 steak knives which fit the size of the murder weapon. These were all collected. All the blood drops in the hallway and kitchen were evidently from someone who was bleeding. In the main bathroom, it was evident that someone had tried to clean up. Blood spatters marred the counter and blood drops stained the sink basin. A black comb and hairbrush with blood on it lay on the floor. The CSIs also collected an orange thread and some hairs in the sink bowl. Other than the one open kitchen drawer, the bed covers being mounded up, and the blood mess throughout the apartment, things were neat and tidy. It didn't appear the suspect had rifled drawers or stolen anything. A walk-in closet and separate powder room appeared undisturbed, but there was a broken chair in the bedroom near Maria's body, indicating that perhaps there had been a physical altercation there. A wet towel on a dining room chair was probably from one of Jenny's boys taking a bath, and several items of clothing around the apartment were identified by Jenny as belonging to her sons. The CSIs measured and photographed the whole scene, dusted the apartment for prints, and vacuumed the area where the body lay for hairs and fibers, several of which were found. They collected blood samples and scrapings from various spots throughout the apartment, including the bedroom walls, the top of the dresser in the bedroom, the hallway walls, the west bathroom walls, door frame and floor, and sink bowl. Quote, "And one kitchen knife having an area of blood on the handle and found in the silverware drawer next to the stove in the kitchen." Nothing of importance was found in the household trash, but because they already suspected that the killer had cut himself, CSI Shull collected a box of Band-Aids in the medicine cabinet and one that was found on top of the fridge, in case he had bandaged himself up and left prints. Also collected by the evidence techs were an ashtray and its contents that were spilled on the floor, a pack of Kools, and a lighter found on the living room coffee table, as well as a jacket draped over a dining room chair identified by Jenny as belonging to Maria. The CSIs collected the bedding, unearthing a silver blood-stained bracelet atop the bottom sheet. The bracelet was identified as Maria's. The pink and white floral sheets, white and green floral quilt, pink blanket, and both floral pillowcases were collected. Some books on the bed had been placed there by Jenny before she went out, so those weren't taken into evidence. But Jenny told the investigators that she always made her bed in the morning, so the fact that the bedding was found all heaped up furthered the theory that the attack on Maria had at least partially happened on the bed. The detectives observed that the front door did not appear to have been forced or tampered with. Remember that Jeff had told Jenny he thought it was unlocked when they got home, but no one was really sure. But they did know that a sliding glass door that connected the living room with the patio had a broken lock. The doors were closed, but they readily opened and couldn't be secured. But since the apartment was on the second floor, this means of entry was considered less likely than the front door. From outside the apartment, blood was collected from 2 spots on the east wall of the east stairway on the first floor near the exit. It was looking like the suspect had exited the building this way after descending the staircase. Sergeant Green and Jenny inspected her sons Dean and John for any injuries but found none. At 12:15 p.m., the boys were sent off with Jenny's sister Mary Lou to spend the rest of that devastating night at her place. The 2 boys must have been totally bewildered about what was happening in their home. Later, Jenny's family was fingerprinted for elimination purposes. Fingerprints on the medicine cabinet and on the closet doors came back to Jenny and John. A latent print was collected from the sliding glass patio door that matched no one. No latent prints were found on any of the 11 knives that were collected from the drawer in Jenny's kitchen or from the kitchen drawer itself. One of the responding officers to the scene on February 7, 1977, was Joe Kenda, who went on to become the homicide hunter. It's crazy that this case involved 2 famous detectives early in their careers, Kenda and Lou Smith, the detective who worked the John Benet Ramsey case in Boulder, Colorado 20 years later. Anyway, Detective Kenda arrived at 11:35 p.m. with another officer, Jose Gurul. Detective Kenda interviewed Jenny and then transported her to the station and asked her some more questions. Sergeant Green re-interviewed her and Jeff again at 2:10 that morning. Of course, Jenny was a crucial witness in the investigation since Maria had been slain in her apartment. Jenny gave a little history of her employment of Maria. She had gotten Maria's name from her former teenage babysitter, Leslie R., who got a real job and recommended her friend Maria to replace her as the regular sitter for Dean and John. Maria babysat for the boys every Monday and Wednesday, from 5 to 11-ish for 75 cents an hour, while Jenny attended her college classes. The 14-year-old had just started 3 weeks earlier. Jenny was asked to recount everything that had happened that evening. She said Maria had shown up for her babysitting gig at 5:05, and she was wearing overalls with no shirt underneath and no shoes. She told Jenny that she had just showered. Jenny showed her where the stuff was to make pancakes for the boys' dinner, per their request, and then she left for school. She attended her night classes at University of Colorado, Colorado Springs campus. Go Buffs. One of her classes finished up at 8:30, and she called the apartment around 9 p.m. and spoke to Maria. It took Maria a few rings to answer, and when she did, she sounded out of breath. She explained she was running for the phone because she had been letting Jenny's dog Fritzy into the apartment. Everything seemed normal. Maria said everything was fine. Jenny made her recite the phone number for the place at the University of Colorado where she could be reached for the next few hours, and they hung up. Next, Jenny detailed coming into the apartment and finding Maria. She noted that Maria had apparently emptied the dishwasher and cleaned up the boys' dinner dishes. She noticed this because while they waited for the police, she got a glass of water from the kitchen and took a Valium. She put the glass on the counter near the sink. And then this from the report. She returned to join Jeff on the sofa. She stated she lit a cigarette and noticed a spilled ashtray on the carpet in front of the sofa and 3 or 4 cigarette butts scattered on the rug, end quote. Jenny dazedly picked up the butts and put them in the ashtray, placing that on the sofa end table. She noticed a box of tissues that belonged on the sofa table was now on the coffee table. She noted her 2 sons' coats were on the floor in front of the couch, and a gold throw pillow was on the couch. Jenny surmised that Maria had been sleeping on the couch, using the pillow and coats as a blanket. Jenny threw the pillow toward a chair across the room, but it hit the wall and landed on the floor where the police found it later. Then she went to look out the glass doors to the patio to see if any police cars were outside yet. She noted the curtains were halfway open, whereas she had left them closed when she went out. While they continued to wait for the police, Jenny then went and woke up the boys to ask if they were okay. I can understand why, as a mom, she would totally need verbal confirmation from her children that they were both physically and emotionally unharmed. They were sleepy, said they were fine, and they wanted to go back to sleep. As she left the room and closed the door, the police arrived. While the investigators were surveying the crime scene and talking to Jenny and Jeff, Maria's father, Glenn Sr., and sister Linda arrived. At least one of the detectives noted that Glenn appeared to be intoxicated. The two were taken down to the station, and Officer Kohler and a victim's advocate told them that Maria had been found dead. The police notes say there was a violent, hysterical reaction from both Linda and Glenn. Detective Kenda had to restrain Glenn, and Linda tried to run out of the building. They calmed her down, but she just kept saying, "This isn't fair. My mother just died at Christmas." She was right. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair at all. Meanwhile, Sergeant Green encountered Glenn Jr. in the stairwell on his way up to Jenny's apartment. Maria's older brother said he'd been helping some friends move until 10:30 that night, and then he was home eating a late dinner when he and his sister Monica saw the police cars arrive at the complex. Looking out the window, he saw his father and sister Linda pull in and saw them head across the courtyard toward Jenny's building, so he had to ride over there to see what was going on. He knew what apartment Maria was babysitting in because she babysat for the same family every Monday and Wednesday night. Glenn Jr. gave Sergeant Green several names of interest. One was the name Michael A., a new boyfriend Maria had recently started dating. He lived in Trinidad, Colorado. Another was a resident of the complex, Mark R., who had just gotten out of the military. He said that Mark was someone the Honzell family did not get along with. I'll get to Mark and Michael in a little bit. A third name was that of Rhonda Martinez, Maria's best friend. She lived in the complex with her mother, Florence. Now, listen carefully because this is a complex web of relationships. Rhonda's mother, Florence, was involved in a romantic relationship with a George A. of Trinidad. George A. was the father of Maria's new boyfriend, Michael. Sergeant Green went to find Rhonda. He figured who would know more about what was going on in the life of a 14-year-old girl than her best friend. He knocked on the apartment door and talked to her mother, Florence. Florence confirmed her daughter, Rhonda, was Maria's best friend and they were inseparable. Sergeant Green asked Florence to wake up Rhonda, a 9th grader at North Junior High. Rhonda was interviewed that night and many times later. She was helpful because she had actually seen and spoken to Maria on the night she was killed. Rhonda said that on the previous afternoon, the two girls took the bus home from school together. After school, they hung out around the complex for an hour or so, and then they each went home. Rhonda knew Maria was babysitting that night. Maria said, "I'll call you later," and she did call, around 7 from Jenny's home phone. She told Rhonda that she wasn't feeling great as she had a bit of a cold. Rhonda's 10-year-old brother Tommy was over at Jenny's apartment, hanging out with the boys Maria was babysitting. Tommy had stayed for a pancake dinner and Rhonda had gone over to get him around 7:30. When Rhonda arrived at the apartment, she found the front door unlocked and walked right in. She told Maria that this was not a good idea and made her promise to lock the door after she left with Tommy after about 10 minutes. Quote, Rhonda stated that after she left, she heard Maria lock the door from the inside before she and Tommy went back to their home, end quote. Rhonda told the investigators that it occurred to her that Maria appeared to be a bit dressed up for babysitting and had makeup and jewelry on. But Maria didn't say anything about expecting any company. Then Maria called Rhonda sometime between 9 and 9:30 and told her that the kids were in bed and asked her to come over, but Rhonda wasn't allowed to as it was a school night. She knew Maria had a cold and told her to lie on the couch and doze for a while and she might feel better. Remember, it appeared from the coats and pillow on the couch that someone had been lying there. As they hung up sometime around 9:30, Rhonda and Maria agreed they would travel to school together the next day. But there would be no next day for Maria. Rhonda was re-interviewed on the 8th by Detectives Spencer and Givens. She said that not everyone liked Maria at school, but when people got to know her, they ended up really liking her. She certainly couldn't think of anyone who hated Maria enough to kill her. She gave the investigators a long list of names to look into, all of which we'll hear about. Rhonda was polygraphed on the 14th. She never changed her story and never gave conflicting details. She passed the exam with flying colors. Meanwhile, Glenn Honzell Sr. was interviewed at the police station on the night of the murder by Detective Garul. Glenn was the head groundskeeper for the Suncrest apartment complex. His wife Eva had been the head cleaner for the buildings until her sudden death the previous December. Glenn was described in Garul's notes as despondent over his wife's and now his daughter's deaths. Once he had calmed down and was able to talk, he told police the following. He last saw Maria at 5 p.m. on the night of the murder when she headed out to babysit. He said she was wearing her jumpsuit, coat, and socks, and he told her to put shoes on, but she didn't listen. After she left, he and his son went to do some work on the complex, and then he and his daughter Linda went to Kmart and then stopped at a bar. They stopped for cigarettes at the gas station on North Nevada Avenue, and while they were there, they saw police cars with lights and sirens flying by them in the direction of the apartment complex. So when they arrived at the complex and saw that the police cars were indeed there, they immediately went to apartment 207 to check on Maria, and that's when they were turned away by the officers. When asked if Maria had any enemies, Glenn said no. There were a couple kids in the complex that had a beef with her friend Rhonda, and Maria had threatened to get involved, but he told her not to. She had also had a minor problem with a girl in the school bus, but that seemed to have been resolved. The only boyfriend he knew was Michael, the kid from Trinidad, Colorado. When Glenn started to cry, they terminated the interview. Linda was interviewed at the same time by Detective Joe Kenda. She was noted to be very upset. She said Maria was home on the afternoon of the day she died watching TV after school, other than an hour or so when she went out with Rhonda for a walk around the neighborhood. Linda told the detective about Maria's boyfriends. One was 19-year-old Rick S., who was stationed with the U.S. Army in Germany. Detective Kenda made a note of this guy's name and to check whether he might have been in Colorado on leave when Maria was killed. It turned out that Rick S. was dating Maria, but he was in Germany at the time of the murder. No one told him Maria had been killed, and when he finally did come home on leave on March 5th, he took a taxi to Maria's apartment and learned the news. Rick was interviewed on March 8th by Detective Haddon. He agreed to turn over all of his and Maria's correspondence, but said that none of Maria's letters mentioned she was having a problem with anyone. Having an ironclad alibi of being an entire ocean away, Rick was crossed off the list. According to Linda, another guy Maria liked was 18-year-old Mark R., a former soldier and resident of the complex who had moved in with Rhonda and her mom Florence after his parents moved out of the complex. Linda had found out that Mark had had sexual relations with Maria and had told him to stay away from her sister. Mark had also been warned by Glenn Honzell to stay away from his daughters Linda and Maria because he was known to smoke pot and was rumored to have had some kind of sexual interaction with Maria. He denied that, but as we'll hear later, it's pretty clear Mark did something to Maria. Mark was the kind of guy who was all tatted up with Hellraiser and things like that, and he had quite a few lady friends and thought a lot of himself. Police noted with great interest that this Mark R. knew where Maria babysat because he had dated Jenny's former babysitter Leslie R. and had been to Jenny's apartment several times to see her and later to see Maria. Also, according to Linda, Mark's father, who lived in Security, Colorado, had a collection of 40 to 50 knives, which he kept in a decorative case in his home, and Mark had access to them. Detective Kenda asked Linda if she had seen or heard anything unusual on the night her sister was killed. Linda said that when she and her dad went out that night to go to Kmart, they saw two young males standing near the telephone booth at the Suncrest apartment complex. She knew these two were the young men that Rhonda, Maria's friend, had had trouble with, and they were the reason that Rhonda had started carrying a knife with a 4-inch blade on her belt. When she told her father who these two were and that they had threatened Rhonda in the past, Glenn stopped the car and told them to go home, and they better not ever threaten or say anything to Rhonda or any of his children. Linda described these two guys to the detectives who took notes. At this time in the interview, Linda became emotional and Detective Kenda halted the interview. Detectives Green and Aldrich interviewed Monica Honzell, Maria's 13-year-old sister. The only thing she had to report was some teenage girl drama. She said she'd had trouble at school that day with some girls who threatened her, saying she thought she was hot stuff. Early in the evening on the night Maria was killed, Monica talked to her older sister Maria on the phone and told her about these girls and their threats to her. Maria ran home for 10 minutes, leaving Jenny's boys under the supervision of a woman named Sherry I will discuss soon. Maria talked to Monica at the apartment, told her to keep the door locked, and went back to Jenny's. Then Monica talked to Maria again on the phone about an hour later, when Maria called the apartment around 9 p.m. During this phone call, Monica said she heard no noises in the background and Maria sounded normal, not like anything was wrong at all. Monica said the only person Maria had mentioned being at the apartment besides herself and the boys was a lady named Sherry, who had come to see Jenny and stayed with the boys while Maria ran across the parking lot to talk to Monica. Okay, so that was it for the family interviews. Police had gathered quite a few names of people they wanted to talk to. Their feeling from very early on in the investigation was that Maria was the specific target of this crime, and her killer was almost certainly someone who knew her. One of the non-family witnesses the police interviewed was Jeff, Jenny's boyfriend, who had come home with her that night. Jeff was from Chicago and worked at the Colorado Springs Racquet Club, although he was also a full-time student at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. Jeff recounted the story of coming home and finding Maria. He said Jenny knocked on the door 3 to 4 times and called for Maria, but there was no answer. He turned the key in the lock, but it didn't click, so it seemed to him the door was unlocked. He said when Jenny came out of the bedroom, she said, "Jeff, Maria's committed suicide." He told her to call the police, and he went into the bedroom and felt Maria's right wrist, but there was no pulse. He walked back to the living room where he turned off the TV. As they waited for the police, the two of them wondered what could have happened. Jeff willingly gave fingerprints for elimination purposes, but Detective Garul noted that he didn't seem nervous or anxious at all, and he didn't seem to set off any red flags for the detective. Jeff had been at the college that night with Jenny, so it was very unlikely he had time to pop over to the apartment and kill the babysitter. Also, Jenny's young son John knew him well, and as we will hear, that meant that Jeff was very likely not the killer. One unexpected investigative avenue in this case involved the fact that when police responded to Jenny's apartment and the CSIs processed the place, they noted and collected a bag containing some Valium pills. The pills were with a note for someone named Sherry, with an itemized bill of sorts for several pills. When Jenny called home around 8:30 p.m. on the night of the murder and spoke with Maria, Maria had told her someone named Sherry stopped by and collected some pills. Was Jenny selling Valium out of her apartment, police wondered. Detective Kenda sat down with Jenny and got the whole story. Jenny had been contacted by a woman she met socially who was from Florida and didn't have a doctor in the state of Colorado. This was Sherry. Sherry was suffering from an unspecified nervous affliction, and she was planning to undergo a medical procedure. She asked Jenny if she could buy some Valium off her. Jenny agreed, and Sherry said she would stop by her apartment on the night of the 7th. Jenny left 25 pills out for her. Sherry came by the apartment that night while Jenny was at class, Maria was alive and well at the time. Detective Garul interviewed Sherry S. on January 11th. She said she'd known Jenny for about 2 months after they met at the college. She'd been to her apartment at least 10 times, and they were very good friends. She knew the boys, John and Dean, well. However, she had never met Maria before that evening. Sherry had arranged to buy some Valium from Jenny. She went over to the apartment around 7:55 p.m. and found the door unlocked. She said, "Hi, I'm Jenny's friend Sherry, and Maria told her to come in. There's something on the table for you." While Sherry was there, the phone rang, and someone named Monica was on the other line. You'll remember that Maria's sister Monica called her and told her about the girl drama she had that day. Maria asked Sherry if she would stay with the boys for just 15 minutes while she popped home. Sherry said, "Sure, as long as you're back by 8:15, as I have to pick up my boyfriend at 8:30. Maria left, Sherry put the boys to bed, and then let the dog Fritzy into the backyard by taking him down the stairs outside the apartment. When Maria got back at 8:15, Sherry left, and Maria also left and went down to get the dog. Detectives asked Sherry all sorts of questions. What was the state of the apartment? Sherry said that she had been looking for some hand lotion, and she went into Jenny's bedroom and noted that the bed was very neatly made. Nothing was out of place. Did she see anyone in the hallway or lurking outside when she let Fritzy out? No. Did she notice anything odd about Maria? No, except it occurred to her that Maria was overly dressed for babysitting in a low-cut, revealing jumpsuit and eye makeup. Sherry gave elimination prints, and the police checked out her boyfriend, but there was nothing more to her story, and the seemingly intriguing Valium angle petered out. But Sherry had contributed significantly to the police understanding of the timeline of the night. Maria was in the apartment alone with the boys at 8:15 p.m. Sergeant Leonard was tasked with searches of the apartment complex area and assigned patrol officers to walk the grounds and adjacent public areas. All the dumpsters in the area contained trash and hadn't been emptied since the murder, but nothing of evidentiary value was found in any of them. Detectives started to canvass the area and speak to the neighbors. Detective Sergeant Geisen and Detective Ownby were instructed by Lieutenant Dalton to canvass the neighbors in Building 5412. They started banging on doors, even though it was the middle of the night. A Sandra Burns, who lived in apartment 105, said around 11 p.m. she heard arguing coming from the second floor. She also heard running up and down the stairs, but didn't see who was doing the running. The detectives spoke with a Beth Louise T., a nurse at Memorial Hospital, who lived in apartment 204 down the hall from the apartment where Maria had been killed. Beth had been doing her laundry that night and made at least 7 trips back and forth to the laundry room between 6:30 p.m. and around 11:15. The laundry room was directly opposite apartment 207. On one of Beth's trips, around 9 p.m., she went to the laundry room and noticed the door to apartment 207 was standing open. She glanced into the apartment and the living room light was on, but she noted nothing amiss and it was quiet. The next time she went back to the laundry room 30 to 45 minutes later, the door to apartment 207 was closed. The across-the-hall neighbor in apartment 208, Carol Ann H., knew who Maria was because she had been friendly with her mother, Eva. Carol had seen Maria that evening, as the teen was helping the boys she babysat for navigate their bikes into the apartment, sometime around 7 p.m. Maria was wearing a blue V-neck jumpsuit. Carol said that after that she didn't see anything out of the ordinary or hear anything. Carol was separated from her husband, Ron, but Ron still spent a lot of time at the apartment with Carol and their 3 small kids. In fact, he was over on the night of the murder. They had dinner and played checkers. The kids went to bed at 8 and Carol went to bed at 9:15. And when she woke up at midnight for a cigarette and a Coke, gotta love the 70s, Ron was asleep in the bed next to her. She didn't know what time he came to bed. He reported 10, but she didn't think he had left the apartment that night at all. Ron knew Maria and Eva too, Carol said. Officers Geisen and Ownby interviewed Ron as well at 1:34 in the morning. He told the officers that after his wife went to bed, he stayed up watching How the West Was Won on TV. He said the walls to the apartment were very thin, and around 9:30 or 9:45 he heard a knock on the door across the hall. And then he heard both male and female voices. He recognized the females as Maria. He couldn't make out anything that was said. Ron said this person who knocked on the door of apartment 207 must have come from down the hall, as he could always hear people climbing the stairs because their apartment shared a wall with the east stairwell. Ron said that a few minutes later he did hear someone climbing the stairwell, and then he heard a different male voice say, "Hi, babe, can I come in?" and enter apartment 207 and close the door. He heard nothing else. The movie ended at 10, and he went to bed. Detective notes show they were highly suspicious of Ron. He seemed nervous during the interview. He admitted he knew Maria, and his wife Carol had mentioned that he shoved her on occasion when he drank too much. These were all red flags for the police, who collected the white t-shirt Carol said Ron was wearing that night. Carol also consented to a search of the apartment, and the cops found 11 empty Schlitz beer cans in the trash, 3 of which had a substance on them that could have been blood. These were collected and sent to the lab, although it was noted that there was raw meat and bones in the trash with the cans. People in the 70s didn't recycle. They also collected a bloody Kleenex from a different trash bin. And then Officer Mike Leonard noted a blood-like substance on the door of apartment 208. So they brought Ron down to the station for questioning. He was read his rights and advised that he was a suspect in Maria's murder, as blood had been found on the door of his apartment. Oddly, Ron's response was that he hadn't washed his hands since he left work at Jim Carlin Dodge. They asked him to recount the plot of the movie he watched that night, How the West Was Won, and he was able to do so in great detail. He said he had nothing to do with Maria's death and volunteered to take a polygraph. Pubic, head, and chest hair samples were collected from Ron, and he was allowed to leave at 4:03 a.m. But before he left, he said he changed his mind about the polygraph and wanted to run it by an attorney. Detectives verified that the program How the West Was Won was on TV that night and ended at 10. And I guess the blood on the beer cans turned out not to be human because Ron wasn't arrested. He was re-interviewed in April. He told the same story about his activities that night. Again, Ron refused a polygraph, saying it was a waste of his time and the taxpayers' money. How considerate. While the neighbor canvass was going on, detectives had gone to Jenny's sister's house and interviewed her sons, John and Dean. 8-year-old John had quite a lot to report. Shout out to John. For a 3rd grader, he was very observant and brave. John and Dean went to bed around 8. This was when Sherry put them to bed while Maria was at her own apartment talking to Monica. Apparently, there was also birthday cake there for her dad, Glenn Sr., that she wanted to eat. Maria returned to Jenny's apartment at 8:15. The boys were still awake. Sherry left, and Maria told the boys good night. She went to shut the bedroom door, but Dean begged her to leave it open, so she did. The boys went to sleep, but John heard a scream that woke him up. He got out of his bed and peered through the open bedroom door. He could see the clock on the wall on the right of the front door. It read just about 10 o'clock p.m. He saw the person who screamed. It was Maria. John had peeked out the bedroom door and around the corner to the right, where he could see the hallway and some of the kitchen. The lights in the kitchen, living room, dining nook, and master bedroom were all on. Maria was pinned against the hallway wall between John's doorway and the master bedroom doorway. A male had his hand over her mouth, trying to make her shut up, as John put it. The guy's other hand was pinning Maria to the wall. John described it as Maria and the man got into the worst fight. John ran back to his bed and lay down. He heard Maria run toward his mom's bedroom, but the man who had been pinning Maria didn't immediately follow. Instead, he walked toward John and Dean's room. John saw the male look into the room with the boys. He screwed up his eyes and pretended to be sound asleep, but he was really peeking, he said. Quote, John related at this time the suspect then started back out and shut the door, and the suspect struck himself in the nose with the door and was rubbing his nose and then did shut the door. About 10 minutes later, John said he heard screaming and pounding. Maria was yelling things like, don't and stop. The phone started ringing, but no one answered it, and Maria kept screaming. Then, according to John, he heard what he described as his mother's silverware drawer being opened in the kitchen. John stated he is not positive that it was the silverware drawer, but it could have been the one under it, as both drawers apparently made the same sound when they were being opened. I'm going to pause here and just say this little kid is amazing. If I had heard strange noises in the night as a kid or seen a man attacking my babysitter, the only way I would ever get out of my bed would be to get under it. John sees a strange man attacking his babysitter and hears running, screaming, and knife drawers, and still he is not afraid. Listen to what happened next. Quote, John then related he got out of bed after hearing the drawer open and went to his door, opened the door, and went down to his mother's bedroom. He stated that the bedroom door was slightly ajar and that he could see in. He stuck his head up close to the crack in the door and peeked through. John was asked by detectives what he saw, and he related he saw this same man raise his hand. John at this time raised his left hand, and it was noted he's left-handed, and he struck down with his left hand like a stabbing motion would be made, end quote. John saw Maria being stabbed, but didn't realize what he was seeing. He ran back to his room, as he put it, at 60 miles an hour, and got back in bed and told his little brother not to worry. Their mom would be home in an hour and 15 minutes. Jenny typically got out of class at 11, and it took her 15 minutes to get home, and John knew this. After a time, John heard the front door slam and felt the man had left. He lay there until he fell asleep. Detectives verified the line of sight of the clock. Standing where John said he had stood in his room, they could see the clock next to the front door clearly. By the way, the detectives asked the kids if they had used any Band-Aids. Remember, they had found a box of Band-Aids in the bathroom. Dean said he had. He put them on a blister he had. But detectives still believed that the suspect had cut himself. They went over the whole apartment again with Jenny on the 9th. And this was when she noted that a small pink hand towel was missing from the towel rack by the bathroom sink. She searched throughout the apartment and couldn't find it. Quote, "There is a possibility that the assailant possibly had his hand wrapped in the towel, and this is possibly what was used to smear fingerprints on the light switch, specifically turning on the light over the dining table and light switch in the master bedroom where the crime scene occurred." End quote. Detective Kenda called area hospitals to see if they had treated anyone with any knife wounds or cuts to the hands. No one had. Within 2 weeks, the deputy coroner reported on his tests of the blood scrapings collected from the bedroom, the bathroom sink, and the dining room light switch. He was able to determine that they were all human, and he was even able to obtain a blood type from the sink sample. Unfortunately, it was type O. Okay, back to the boys. Detectives interviewed Dean separately. The little 6-year-old hadn't seen anything, but he had heard some things as well. He, too, had heard the silverware drawer open and close. But he also heard a sound he thought was someone throwing up. He heard water running, and he heard Maria say, "Oh shit," which he whispered in the detective's ear because he didn't want to say a bad word. After Dean described the running water, the detective's notes say that it was likely in the main hall bathroom, as the bathroom in the master bedroom would be too far away for him to hear the water. This made sense, since that was the bathroom the towel was missing from. So what the heck happened here? A young male was in the apartment attacking Maria, and John got a decent look at him. Maria ran to the bedroom. The guy came to the boys' bedroom and eyed them. They pretended to be asleep, and he closed the door. Then he got a knife from the kitchen, went into the master bedroom and stabbed Maria, and then he threw up, washed up, and left the apartment with the pink towel from the bathroom wrapped around his arm or hand. It was outlandish. Yet John and Dean's stories and the evidence suggested that this is indeed what happened. Detectives requested that John be made available to try to reenact the scene he had witnessed in the apartment. He and his father, Tom, met with the detectives at the apartment on the 8th. Detectives told John it was very important that he try to remember as much as he could about this man whom he saw fighting with Maria. He said the man was white but had a tan complexion, very thin, about 6 feet tall, clean-shaven, and he had young skin with red bumps, presumably acne, on his cheeks. He was about 17 or 19 years old. He might have brown eyes, but he wasn't sure. As for his clothes, he was wearing a puffy dark blue down coat, jeans, and dark tennis shoes, possibly black, with white soles and toes like Converse. The man had collar-length hair curled up in the back with bangs or cut in a pageboy haircut. John was a little unclear on the hair color, saying it was dark but had gray in the back. And this was key, he had never seen him before. John felt sure he could ID the suspect if police showed him a picture of the guy. Police weren't sure how much stock to put into the description provided by an 8-year-old. But John had gotten 3 looks at the killer and had been pretty certain of what he looked like and detailed about what he was wearing. Jenny also said that her husband worked with teens and therefore John was very good at guessing teenage ages. He was also a wrestling fan and could guess weight very accurately as well. Jenny and her sons moved out of the complex within days of the murder and started using a different last name. They were understandably very afraid. The detectives re-interviewed John again later, and he told the same story in great detail. But he hadn't been told that Maria was dead. He thought she was just in the hospital. After he found out that she'd been killed, he teared up and told his mom, "I'm scared." Nonetheless, police proposed hypnotizing John, and Jenny agreed to let them do it. The session took place on April 9th. Dr. James Fish administered the hypnosis. All in all, the doctor felt that the session wasn't really that successful. John appeared to be resistant and showed fear when he was asked some of the questions. This poor kid, I can't imagine he didn't want to go through the whole thing again. They tried again on April 18th. This time it appeared to Dr. Fish that John was deep into hypnosis. When he recounted the story, it was clear that he did not know the suspect's name. He gave the same general description of the suspect, quote, "The only discrepancies would be the color of hair," end quote. John had originally said that the suspect had dark hair with gray in the back. In this session, he related that when the suspect reached in to grab his doorknob to shut the door to his bedroom, the way the light hit his hair, it looked kind of light or grayish looking. All the other aspects of the description remained the same. He was a white male in his teens, red pockmarked face, hair down over his forehead in bangs, the hair on the sides of the head approximately crossing the ears and then down to the collar at the back. He was wearing a very fluffy blue down coat zipped all the way up to the collar, blue jeans, and black tennis shoes. This time, John said that the suspect hitting himself in the nose with the bedroom door indicated to him that the guy could have been drunk. After the session, it was deemed that John's description was very consistent with the first story and was likely accurate. John's suspect description was used to eliminate men from that point on. On February 9th, Jenny called Detective Kenda and said she'd thought of something. She said she had a male friend from the University of Colorado Cragmore campus who had been over to her apartment on a few occasions over the past month. This was a guy named Bill Kernan. She said that Bill was struggling in his married life and he and his wife were considering a divorce. He was pretty upset about it. Bill had actually called her at her apartment on the night of the murder, around 5 p.m., and talked about his marital issues. She saw him just a little while later at the college, around 6:45. He generally wore a blue puffer jacket, jeans, and dark tennis shoes, and fit the suspect description. Except he was far from a teenager. He was 27 and had a receding hairline. And John had met him. Jenny reported that she had asked John if the guy he saw hurting Maria could have been Bill Kernan, and he said no. He was certain Bill was not the man he'd seen. Bill, he said, was much too old and much too large. Okay, so let's review the timeline. Maria was babysitting for John and Dean and returned to the apartment at 8:15 after going to her own apartment for 15 to 20 minutes. At around 9, she called Rhonda. She also called her sister Monica. Nothing seemed amiss other than she felt like she had a cold. One of her sisters, I don't know which one, later told Rhonda she called Jenny's apartment at 9:40 and there was no answer. A neighbor down the hall, Beth, the lady doing her laundry, said the apartment door was standing open around 9 p.m. This was possibly when Maria went to get the dog, right as Jenny called the house. The across-the-hall neighbor, Ron, said around 9:30 or 9:45 he heard a knock on the door of apartment 207. A few minutes later, he heard footsteps in the stairwell and heard a different male voice say, "Hi, babe, can I come in?" and enter apartment 207 and close the door. That was the last interaction anyone had with Maria. Even though police viewed Ron H., the across-the-hall guy, as a potential suspect in the case, they somehow also put a lot of stock into what he told them, specifically the words "hi, babe" he had heard a male voice saying he thought to Maria. To the investigators, it meant that someone who knew Maria well, who called her babe, had come calling that night. Whether Maria was dressed up in her jumpsuit, jewelry, and makeup because she was expecting someone was anyone's guess. Jenny told Detective Kenda that she had come home on the night of January 28th at 11 p.m. to find a teenage boy in the apartment with Maria. This was 17-year-old Michael A., Maria's new boyfriend. Jenny was upset about this incident and told Maria, "No more visitors while you're watching my kids." It didn't happen again to her knowledge. But when Maria showed up to babysit that night in her jumpsuit, Jenny noted to herself and later told Detective Kenda that the outfit was a bit sexy, and she wondered if she was having a male friend over after she put the boys to bed. When she called the apartment around 9, she thought she heard something in the background, but it could have been the TV. On February 9th, while going over the apartment for a second time, Detective C.J. Pizzatola and Corporal Haddon saw something. I can't for the life of me figure out how this got missed on the first go-around, but while in the apartment, they saw a gold-colored metal object lying on the shag carpet in the hallway. It was observed that this is a blood-stained metal cap appearing to be the hilt portion of a knife. Specifically, the item was a small brass copper piece with a slit in it for a knife blade that would slide down over the knife blade and attach to the handle and act as a hilt. Detectives showed this hilt to Jenny, and she had no idea where it came from. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the boy Jenny found in the apartment with Maria back in January, Michael A. Michael lived with his grandmother, Delphi, in Trinidad, Colorado. Michael and Maria had been dating for a few weeks, but Maria had been allowed to go stay with Michael in Trinidad for the previous weekend. This was because Linda, Maria's older sister, was dating George A., Michael's brother. The two sisters, along with Linda's 2-year-old son James, went to visit the brothers together for the weekend before Maria was killed. They all planned to stay at the brothers' grandmother Delphia's home, but Delphia wanted none of this. She said she had never met these girls before. One of them was 14 and the other had a small child, and she made them stay elsewhere. They ended up staying at the Pueblo home of their father, George Sr., the one who was dating Rhonda's mom, Florence. Michael and his brother George brought Linda and Maria home on Sunday evening and met the family, including their dad, Glenn Sr. Then they drove back to Trinidad, they said. Maria was killed on Monday night. Delphia, the grandma, told police on Monday the 7th George was at her place and never left, and Michael went to school. He was a high schooler at Trinidad High School and had classes on weekdays. This was confirmed with the school and verified by George and Michael's mother. Trinidad was 2 hours away from Colorado Springs. Michael initially refused to meet with detectives, I think out of a family mistrust of police, but finally met with Detectives Pizzatola and Haddon on the 17th. Michael said he and Maria were serious and wanted to get married. This was kind of absurd because they'd been going together for only a few weeks, and by the way, Maria was a child. But it was clear Michael liked Maria. He was upset about her death. Answering questions from police inquiring about the information they had, Michael said yes, he owned a navy blue down jacket, but he never called Maria babe. And it was impossible for him to be home in Trinidad after school on Monday the 7th and also have been 2 hours away in Colorado Springs by 10 o'clock that night. George, Michael's older brother, was a different story. He became one of the focuses of the investigation, definitely considered a suspect by police. This was for a multitude of reasons. 1, he was known to carry a knife. 2, he was reported by several people as tending to call people, including Maria, babe. 3, he admitted that he had had a crush on 14-year-old Maria, even though he was dating her sister. Ew. 4, he admitted he had been to Jenny's apartment and he had visited Maria there. And 5, he matched the description of the suspect down to dark blue tennis shoes. Detective Garul interviewed George. George said he had introduced Michael and Maria, whom he had met through his girlfriend Linda, Maria's sister. He said Maria was a nice girl, and he and Linda chaperoned the 2 younger ones on weekend dates. He said they weren't sexually active because they were Jehovah's Witnesses. He described Maria as very straight, meaning I think that she wasn't a partier. George said the last time he had seen Maria was on Sunday night when he and his brother dropped the sisters off at their home in the apartment complex. George was re-interviewed on the 8th by Detectives Kenda and Garul. They read him his rights. They made him recount what he did on Monday the 7th in detail. Funnily enough, like Ron, Jenny's neighbor, George also watched How the West Was Won on TV that night at his grandmother's house in Trinidad where he was staying. Then they asked him about an incident he had been involved in Wyoming. The detectives had heard from Leslie, Jenny's former sitter who had handed the job over to Maria, that George had told her that when he was in Wyoming he had killed a guy and cut him up into small pieces and thrown the parts from a moving vehicle. He had also told her on several occasions if anyone made him angry he would just kill them. She said she had seen him carrying a gun in a homemade holster. Well, it seemed like George was the kind of guy who liked to brag about stuff he hadn't really done. Under questioning, he admitted that when he was working on a ranch in Casper, Wyoming, he and his buddy Nick beat up a guy who George thought had assaulted his girlfriend. He wanted to castrate the guy, but his buddy stopped him. George didn't remember any of this because he was very drunk. George was questioned by sheriff's deputies about the incident but was let go. The whole murder, dismemberment thing, that didn't happen. Detectives verified this with Wyoming authorities. As for Maria's murder, George was alibied by his brothers Michael and Gary and his grandmother Delphia, all of whom were home with him in Trinidad on Monday night. George said he had no idea who would kill Maria. He definitely didn't. So George was kind of an idiot. He checked a lot of boxes and his only alibi was family. As a result, he stayed on the suspect list. The detectives collected the case knife he carried and he agreed to a polygraph. The polygraph administered on the 18th showed some deception. George would stay on the suspect list for years to come. Now for one of the weirder red herrings I have come across. The Colorado Springs detectives conducted an experiment where Detective Kenda stood in the master bedroom of apartment 207 and yelled, and detectives in the living room of apartment 208, the one where Ron H. said he was watching How the West Was Won, couldn't hear anything, especially with the TV on. While they were there, they noticed blood spatter outside the apartment. They decided to check the surrounding buildings, and Detective Garul saw what looked like blood spots on the wall of the staircase in Building 5402. The south entrance to this building, where the spots were found, was directly in line with the north exit from Building 5412, Jenny's building, across the courtyard. The detectives followed the blood spots, which were somewhat evenly spaced, and they led them up the staircase wall to the second floor, around the corner at the top of the stairs, to the door leading to apartment 212. The door frame to this apartment had blood on it. Scrapings were collected and the lab determined that the spots were indeed blood. The residents of apartment 212 in Building 5402 were the Furlong family. Mr. and Mrs. Furlong had 3 kids, ages 15, 11, and 7. Their 15-year-old daughter was friends with Maria, and Maria had been over to their place a number of times. They noted that Maria was mature for her age, but they had no insight on her murder. The detectives asked the family about the blood spots leading to their apartment. The Furlongs said they had a very good explanation for that. They had a full-grown greyhound dog whose tail had had an unfortunate accident where the wind blew the heavy complex door shut on the animal's tail. The injury caused a deep cut, and the dog, whom the family described as a persistent tail wagger, sprayed blood around every time it wagged its tail as it went back up to the apartment. They tried to clean it up, but they had clearly missed some. Additional blood spots were found on the walls in the apartment that matched the blood drops in the stairway. Detectives believed them, and that was the end of that lead. Detectives placed a lot of importance on the suspect description plate provided by 8-year-old John, and they did a lot of work to try to find the teenage male he described in detail. Detective Pizzatola tracked down the apartment complex manager and superintendent. His assistant, a maintenance man, was also present. The detective described the man John had seen in the apartment, but neither of them could think of any residents of the complex who met that description. The investigators gathered all the condolence notes sent to Maria's family, scanned the funeral guest book, and asked whether any of those men fit the description. They read through all the notes and letters Maria had in her room. They went to Maria's school and asked about teenagers fitting the suspect description. They also checked with the youth treatment center where Maria had gotten counseling, and there learned the name of a student, a Matthew Russell R., a Hawaiian-American male who had a bad complexion, tannish skin, and was 6 foot tall and 170 pounds. The school head said in his opinion Matthew was capable of committing this crime. But detectives interviewed him and noted no cuts to his person, and there was no evidence he had done anything to Maria. There was another angle of the investigation that took detectives down a very long road to nowhere, although one viable suspect did come out of it. The amount of time and resources expended investigating this lead cannot be overstated. In short, a male using the name Ben Johnson called the Colorado Springs PD on the afternoon of the 8th, the day after the murder. The caller was speaking very quietly and said he was a student at Palmer High School and was calling from a phone booth. He said that the evening before, on the 7th, an 18-year-old high school buddy of his named Larry Garnett had told him that he had some business to settle with Maria Honzell, Rhonda Martinez, Leslie R., and 2 guys named Matt J. and Andy H. That night, Maria was killed. This Ben Johnson, a made-up name, called back later that same day and spoke with Lieutenant Arthur Dalton. The police were ready and recorded the call. Lieutenant Dalton observed the caller appeared to be a young male about 15 or 16 years old. Again, this Ben Johnson said this guy he had talked to, Larry, had said he had taken care of his business with Maria and he had 4 more people to take care of and would take care of them the same way. His remaining targets were Rhonda Martinez, Leslie R., Andy H., and Matt J., all students at North Junior High. So detectives had this recorded phone call naming possible future victims who, the caller said, were going to suffer the same fate as Maria Honzell. They really wanted to know who the caller was. There was no student at Palmer High School named Ben Johnson. So they played the recording for pretty much everyone they had talked to who knew Maria. They wanted people to listen to the caller's voice and see if they could identify him. A lot of people listened to the tape, and as a result, everyone knew that someone was making threats to Leslie, Rhonda, and the 2 guys whose names the caller had said. This news got back to Maria's school and caused widespread panic and fear. All sorts of gossip and rumors flew about who this Larry Garnett was, whether those other students were doomed, and what they and Maria could have done to cross him. Police accused Rhonda of knowing something she wasn't sharing with them. She didn't. In fact, Rhonda and her mom were so scared they moved to Pueblo. It turned out that lots of people recognized the voice of the caller pretending to be Ben Johnson. He actually was one of the boys named by the caller as a would-be target, Matt J. He was a 14-year-old friend of Leslie R.'s and Rhonda's from North Junior High. And like the male described by John as the one who hurt Maria, he was tall, dark-haired, and had bad acne. Detectives went to interview Matt J. at the trailer park where he lived. In short, he lied his face off. He said he didn't know who Ben Johnson or Larry Garnett were. He did know Andy H., and he knew Maria to say hello, but was better friends with Leslie and Rhonda. He said he learned through other students at the school that someone had threatened him and the 2 girls. He said he had no idea who killed Maria. Matthew's mom alibied him, saying he was home on Monday the 7th, but we all know how detectives feel about mom alibis. And Matthew's father told the detectives his son was a chronic liar and consented to him taking a polygraph. Matt took one on the 14th, and the results indicated deception. The detectives talked to his father afterwards and told him his son was a suspect. They brought Mac back to the detective division and read him his rights. They asked him whether he wished to discuss the case with the detectives, and he said no, he did not. On the 16th, Matt took a second polygraph and failed that one also. The detectives asked his mother to take one to see if she was telling the truth about him being home. She readily agreed and then said she thought her son might be mentally ill. She was concerned that he didn't know right from wrong. The polygrapher determined it was possible she wasn't 100% certain her son was home that night. A woman who knew Matt J. named Rose reported he was at her house the day the news of Maria's murder came out. Rose said that he was overly excited talking about the murder and told her he might be in trouble. They collected head hairs from Matt J. Jenny's son John was shown a photo lineup of some teens arrested by the CSPD on other offenses, plus Matthew. He said the man he saw with Maria was not in the lineup. Detective Spencer interviewed Andy H., a ninth grader at North Junior High. He was one of the kids named by the Ben Johnson caller. Andy didn't know Maria. He didn't know any of the others either except Matt J., whom he did not like. In fact, Andy thought Matt was the type of person who could have killed Maria. Andy said he had no idea why he would have been named by the anonymous caller, and said that on Monday the 7th, just like every weekday, he went to school, came home, did his paper route, and did his homework. His mom would vouch that he was home that night. On the 15th, detectives Haddon and Pizzatola returned to Matthew's home. They spoke with his mom and told her that they believed the reason her son had failed his polygraph was because he was lying about the Ben Johnson phone calls. They called Matt into the room and sat him down and said it was very important that he just told them the truth about whether he made those calls. Matt looked at them and admitted that he was the caller. He phoned from the Quick-Away store on North Hancock. He said he totally made up the names Ben Johnson and Larry Garnett. The detectives asked him why he did it, and he said he wanted everyone to think he was on the kill list. He wanted to boost his prestige with his friends and to become more popular at North Junior High. The whole thing was made up, and he had nothing to do with Maria's death. Here's where I would rip into Matt J. for wasting the investigators' time and drawing their attention away from possibly legitimate suspects. But it turns out this kid, Matt, was actually mentally ill. We will hear a little more about him over the years as detectives returned to the original suspect list time and again. Okay, let's talk about a guy whom police were very suspicious of, Mark R. This was the tatted-up ex-military guy who they heard had a sexual encounter with 14-year-old Maria. Mark was named by numerous people who knew Maria as either being involved with her or having a feud with her. Renee H. was a very good friend of Maria's from the youth treatment center. Renee told detectives Maria was a nice, very motherly girl who always tried to help other kids at the youth treatment center. When they asked Renee if she could think of anyone who might have killed Maria, the only person she named was Maria's ex-boyfriend Mark R. because he was a, quote, real asshole. The assistant manager of the Suncrest apartment complex, Warren Patterson, told the investigators that he had had a lot of trouble with Mark. Residents complained about confrontations with him. It was known he carried a gun, as he'd shown it to various people. And the head of security for the complex, William Mars, had seen Mark carrying a knife. In his interview with Detectives Spencer and Gibbons on the 8th, in the apartment where he lived with Rhonda and her mom Florence, Mark R. admitted he knew Maria well. He said he'd never been intimate with her, but he had kissed her. He knew that she liked him. Mark was definitely lying about the extent of his involvement with Maria, police would learn. Further, he knew that she was babysitting at Jenny's that night, and he admitted that he had visited with her at the apartment several times in the past, just the two of them, after the kids went to bed. He told the detectives that Glenn Honzell had warned him to stay away from his girls after he found out that Mark had smoked pot with Maria's 13-year-old sister. Quote, detectives asked Mark if there was anyone he could think of that would have it in for Maria. He stated that she did have enemies and was a hard person to get to know. She had some enemies at school, end quote. Mark admitted that he carried an Olsen hunting knife in a leather sheath, which detectives collected for testing. He denied having a gun. As for an alibi, when asked where he was on the night of the 7th, he said he punched into his job at Consolidated Cleaning at 3:30 p.m., and he punched out at 11:50. This was confirmed by his time card. However, police heard from multiple people, including George A., Linda's boyfriend who worked with Mark, that because Mark was a supervisor, he was able to leave for periods of time during his shift. Police noted it was just about a 9 to 11-minute drive between his work on Wood Avenue and the scene of the crime. Mark was interviewed again on the 11th by Detectives Haddon and Pizzatola. He again said he didn't kill Maria and he didn't know who did. He agreed to submit to a polygraph exam on the 21st, which deemed him to be telling the truth in his answers. He also gave head hair samples to police. Nonetheless, police questioned Mark again on the 19th. They read him his rights and he waived them. They told him that they had learned he and Maria had been intimate. The detectives had heard from several other people that at a house party several weeks earlier, Maria had been inebriated and Mark got her into a bedroom. She had a seizure, and Mark had to call for help, and when people went into the bedroom, they found that Maria was naked. Remember, she was 14. Mark denied this, saying Maria liked him, but he wasn't interested. After this last interview, Mark had abruptly left his job and moved to Pueblo. People felt he was acting strange. He told some people he couldn't sleep since the murder. He also talked a lot about the injuries to Maria and the number of times she was stabbed and where. Mark stayed on the list. One of the adult soldiers who hung around the complex came to the attention of police early on because he was present on the night Maria was killed. This was Larry H., a soldier at Fort Carson, who was dating Maria and Rhonda's friend Leslie R. His buddy Stephen B. was dating Rhonda. These girls were 15, I will reiterate. I don't know why any of this was okay, but apparently no one batted an eye. Anyway, Stephen and Larry hung out at the complex often and knew Maria's family, Rhonda's family, Leslie's family, and so on. Larry told investigators he picked Leslie up from work at Dairy Queen at 11 on the 7th, and they went back to her apartment and briefly watched TV. Her parents were asleep. Because it was a school night for Leslie, he left around 11:30, and as he drove out, he saw police cars coming to the complex, so he turned around and went back. Police cars were parked outside Maria's building. He parked his car and got out, and he saw Glenn Honzell Sr. and Linda getting out of their car with their groceries. Another police car arrived, and they all looked up and saw all the lights on and the police activity at the apartment where Maria was babysitting. They decided to go up to the second floor and see what was going on. When they got to the top of the stairs, the police would not let them into the apartment, and Glenn Sr., who was quite intoxicated, became belligerent and refused to leave without seeing his daughter. Larry and Linda tried to get him to leave, but he grabbed the railing and wouldn't let go. Maria's brother arrived and tried to get his father to leave, but he still wouldn't go, so some police officers had to take him out of the building. Detective Lou Smith questioned Larry right there and then, as he was a random guy who had shown up to gawk at the crime scene, saying he knew the victim. Smith asked Larry who he was and what he was doing there. He asked if he was carrying a knife and searched his person. This was when Larry realized something very bad had happened to Maria. Detective Smith noted Larry had no scratches on him or any evidence of blood on his clothing and allowed him to leave. Larry was re-interviewed on April 23rd by Sergeant Green. He admitted he had been in the apartment where Maria was babysitting a few times because he and Rhonda went over to visit Maria. Oddly, Larry admitted that he had paid for a necklace Maria liked to wear, but he had bought one for Leslie too from a catalog Rhonda's mom sold out of. But it wasn't the necklace she was wearing on the night she was killed. Sergeant Green then read Larry his rights and then asked him directly whether he'd killed Maria or knew who'd killed Maria. Larry said no, everyone liked Maria. She was really nice. She had no enemies or problems with anyone. Larry couldn't think of anyone who might have wanted to hurt her. Sergeant Green asked Larry if he was willing to take a polygraph, and he said yes. But he didn't take one. On May 15th, detectives received word from Leslie that Larry H. had gone AWOL from the military and moved to New Mexico. He had called her and told her he had no intention of taking the polygraph. Well, that looked suspicious. Larry H. stayed on the list. Detectives learned the name of a teenage boy who fit the description provided by John to a T, and who seemed to have some problems with Maria and her family. This was 16-year-old H.C. Evans. H. Evans had lived in the apartment complex until recently and returned to the complex often to visit friends. This guy was described as having some anger issues and mental problems and was easily provoked. He had gotten into an argument with Linda and her mother the previous fall, and H.C. had verbally assaulted the two women. Linda reported that Rhonda and Maria also had a confrontation with this H.C. Evans guy in which he had actually slapped Maria. Glenn Honzell confirmed to the investigators that H.C. wasn't right in the head. He often threatened the residents and was very angry. Glenn Jr. said he had gone to a party that H.C. attended during the summer of 1976, and H.C. got very drunk and belligerent and got into a fight with 5 people in which he attacked them without regard to his personal safety. The implication was that he was violent, unpredictable, and a little crazy, and drinking exacerbated the situation. So H.C. sounded really good on paper and fit the physical description John had provided. But there was one problem. H.C. had supposedly moved to Ohio the previous December. His parents said he was living with relatives and had made a collect call home on the 7th, the very day Maria was killed. H.C. stayed on the list just because he was never definitively crossed off. So we have multiple suspects, all of whom had a connection to Maria, and all of whom looked very suspicious for one reason or another. But the physical evidence didn't point to any of them. In fact, it arguably ruled some of them out. because testing showed that the hair samples taken from Maria's body and floor sweepings around her body were dissimilar to samples provided by Ron H., Matt J., Mark R., and George A. The hairs found appeared to be naturally curly, unlike the hair of those men. Now let's discuss a suspect who many people, both law enforcement and civilian, strongly believed was responsible for Maria's murder. On June 30th, Detective Haddon received a nationwide law enforcement bulletin about a man in custody of the Warwick, Rhode Island Police Department who was suspected of a homicide in that state. He was Ronald Proul, a 20-year-old white male. Proul had been arrested for abducting a 10-year-old girl at gunpoint, taking her to a remote wooded area and murdering her with a blunt object after attempting to commit a sexual attack on her. The bulletin said that this guy Proul was known to have traveled the western part of the country beginning on December 26, 1976 through March 29, 1977, and specifically had been in Colorado Springs. That tidbit is what piqued the interest of the Colorado Springs investigators. Indeed, it turned out that Proul had been arrested on March 27, 1977, on an outstanding warrant for a misdemeanor traffic offense, a turn violation he'd committed in Colorado Springs on February 13th. Detectives took a look at Proul's mugshot from that arrest and noted that he matched the description of the suspect in Maria's homicide. He was a tall white male, had severe acne on his face, and had collar-length, stringy dark hair. The address that Proul had put down at the time of the arrest was the home of a Patricia G. on Windward Circle. Detective Haddon went to her house and interviewed her on July 4th. I guess this guy doesn't take a holiday off. Patricia said she'd been set up on a blind date with this guy Proul. They'd gone out, he'd been nice enough, and he'd stayed over a few times. Mostly he stayed at another friend's house, though, because she didn't want him around her kids. That seemed like a good call, because Patricia said that Proul's personality completely changed on March 27th at a party at her house, where he was drinking Jack Daniels. He'd asked to use her car, and she said no because he was drunk and he went crazy. He hit a guest on the head with a 2x4 and threatened to kill anyone who got near him. She called the police because he threatened to hit her with a board. The police had to come and talk him down, and he cried and talked his way out of a more serious charge. This is when they arrested him on the traffic warrant. Patricia was convinced that he had a split personality and said his mother told her he had major psychiatric issues. They asked Patricia what Proul tended to wear, and she said blue jeans and either boots or blue sneakers with white stripes. He also wore a navy ski jacket. Patricia said Proul tended to call her babe. Bingo. After doing a lot of digging, detectives verified that Proul had indeed been in the Colorado Springs area on the very date when Maria was murdered. Patricia had picked him up at the bus station on January 27th after he had finished a long-distance trucking job. After that, he worked several more jobs, always getting fired because of his temper and shiftiness that put others off. So at the end of March 1977, Proul was in jail in Colorado Springs, but not for long. His mother bailed him out and he went home to Rhode Island and killed the 10-year-old girl there. Here's what happened in the Ocean State. Sergeant Simpkins of the Warwick, Rhode Island Police Department told Colorado Springs investigators they had reports of Proul prowling and peeping in windows. They had also nabbed him after an incident in December 1974 when he tried to lure a 15-year-old girl named Nancy Volpe into his car at gunpoint. Quick-thinking Nancy refused to get in the car and said her boyfriend was standing across the street. There was a guy standing across the street, but Nancy didn't know him. At this, the suspect sped off and she reported it. The suspect was later identified as Ronald Proul. Proul had also faced charges for assault with a deadly weapon for stabbing a man in the stomach. It was unclear why he didn't spend a very long time in prison, but it was the 1970s. We've seen suspects get a slap on the wrist for serious crimes quite a bit in that era. Proul's most recent victim was a 10-year-old girl named Beverly Gore. Beverly disappeared while walking home from school in Cranston, Rhode Island, and was reported missing on June 3, 1977. Her body was found on June 29th in Warwick. Quote, Beverly Gore's head was badly decomposed at the time her body was discovered, but investigators of the Warwick Police Department felt Miss Gore was a victim of homicide due to the fact that her body had been dragged for some distance through the heavy undergrowth to a more secluded spot back into some trees, end quote. A piece of bloody pipe was found near her body. According to the autopsy report, Beverly's cause of death was basilar skull fracture, and she was killed almost immediately after she was abducted. She was found fully clothed, except for her shirt, which was pushed up around her neck, apparently from being dragged through the undergrowth by her feet. Beverly was so badly decomposed, the pathologist could not determine whether she'd been sexually assaulted. Proul was easily caught because on the night he took Beverly, June 23rd, his car had been broken down right near the location where the body was later found. A teen named Roger Benson, the son of a captain in the Warwick Police Department, told his dad, after seeing the news of the dump site, that he had helped a man at that very location jumpstart his car battery. This guy's car had been dead at the very spot from which they believed the body was dragged. He walked to a nearby burger shack and Robert agreed to help him out. Brilliantly, somehow Robert remembered the name Ronald Proul or the license plate or something and gave the description to the police. Once the Warwick PD arrested Proul, back at the police station he gave a ludicrous statement about how he had picked up Beverly, but he didn't realize how young she was. Remember, she was 10. And he tried to let her out of the car, and she fell and hit her head or some nonsense like that. He also became belligerent, jumped out of his chair and held up his fists and told the detectives that he could beat them up. Sergeant Simpkins said, "Maybe you can beat us up." And then Proul started crying and sat down in his chair. He ended up confessing. Back in Colorado Springs, Detective Haddon spoke with Sergeant Simpkins, who told him that the police in Rhode Island felt strongly that Proul had targeted children, like Beverly Gore and Nancy Volpe, because he could not, quote, get girls because of his weird behavior and his severe acne. They compared notes about their cases and the description of the suspect in Maria's case, and Simpkins said he thought Proul sounded like a prime suspect. When he interviewed Proul, he felt that he had probably been involved in a prior murder to Beverly's. Detective Haddon went all in on Proul, trying to connect him to Maria. He found witnesses who saw Proul cleaning his nails with a knife, indicating that he carried one. He admitted to Rhode Island authorities that he had cut Beverly Gore's throat, indicating he wasn't afraid to use the knife. He seemed to prefer female child targets, which Maria was. Haddon agreed for the lab to check Proul's blue puffer coat and jeans and sneakers, which he had left behind in Colorado for blood. He showed Proul's picture to Maria's family, but they didn't recognize him. Neither did her friends. But Patricia said Proul had ready access to her Mustang, and he might have been driving it on the night of February 7th. A green Mustang had been seen in Maria's apartment complex parking lot around the same time. The detective tracked down Patricia's green Ford Mustang, which she had loaned to Proul often before she wrecked it, and had the interior forensically analyzed for any trace of Maria's murder. On July 12th, Detective Haddon called up Jenny Kay and asked her if she would allow her son John to look at a photo lineup that included a photo of Ronnie Proul. John looked at the photos and said he didn't think the suspect's picture was in there. Detectives told him to take his time and look again, and John picked out the photo of Proul and said, quote, "This looks like the guy, but his hair is too curly and his face doesn't have enough zits," end quote. The detectives noted that the photo of Proul shown to John was taken months after the attack on Maria. Maybe he had let his hair grow a bit and started using Stridex. At the end of August 1977, Detective Haddon's notes indicate that they felt they'd reached the point in the investigation where circumstantial evidence obtained against Proul was sufficient to warrant a live lineup. So on August 25th, Detective Haddon and now 9-year-old John and his mother Jenny flew to Rhode Island and met with Sergeant Simpkins of the Special Investigations Unit of the Warwick PD. The lineup was conducted on August 26th at the Warwick Police Department. Poor little John must have been terrified. The lineup consisted of 8 white males. Before they brought the guys in, they allowed John to go into the lineup room to see for himself that no one could see through the one-way mirror. Then he was taken back to the adjoining room separated by the mirror and the lineup commenced. Quote, "The witness did view this lineup, and while viewing this lineup, detectives noticed the lower lip of the witness trembling. After standing in silence for approximately a minute and a half, Detective Haddon finally asked the witness if he'd ever seen any of these parties before, and the witness stated no," end quote. They confirmed with John, asking if he could identify anyone in the lineup as being the party that was in his apartment on the night of February 7th, and he said he could not. But after the lineup, John commented that Proul, who was lined up at position number 3, looked the most like the suspect he'd seen, but he wasn't quite tall enough. So they decided to redo the lineup, shuffling the order of the guys. Quote, "The witness stated that he could not identify the suspect. He did state that the suspect in this case, Ronald Proul, looked more like the suspect than anyone else present," end quote. John was surprised to learn that when he had viewed the photo lineup back in Colorado Springs, he had picked out the same guy as looking the most like the suspect. So the lineup didn't do anything to advance the case against Proul, but it certainly didn't rule him out either. So the Colorado Springs investigators collected head, armpit, chest, and pubic hair samples from Proul pursuant to a search warrant, and they were sent to the CBI crime lab. Meanwhile, the latent partial palm print found on the edge of Jenny's sliding glass door by CSI Havercorn did not match the inked palm print of Ronnie Proulx. Throughout the remainder of 1977, Detective Haddon did a ton of work trying to connect Proulx definitively to Maria's murder, but could not. Detectives in Colorado Springs felt that Proulx was their man, but they had no way to prove it. No one knew of Proulx spending time at the Suncrest Apartments. He had no known connection to Maria or Jenny, and no one had seen him except possibly Little John. The case stalled. In December 1979, Detective Rich Reisler was reassigned to the Crimes Against Persons Division of the Colorado Springs PD. One of the cases he was given to reinvestigate was Maria Honzell's. The murder was coming up on the 3rd anniversary, and it remained unsolved. Detective Reisler interviewed now-retired Detective Haddon, who told him his personal theory that Ronnie Proulx had killed Maria. He believed Proulx was the man who had been reported as a peeping Tom on a number of occasions in the area of 5200 North Nevada in 1977. And he said that he knew Proulx had lied about being in the area of the apartment complex on the date Maria was killed. The station manager at the Husky gas station at 5200 North Nevada identified Proulx as being there on that date. By this time, Ronnie Proulx had been convicted of second-degree homicide for the murder of Beverly Gore and was serving prison time in Rhode Island. He was eligible for parole in 1985, but he wasn't having an easy time in prison. This was because Beverly Gore's mother was an employee at the state penitentiary in Cranston, where he was incarcerated. So he had to be in protective custody as the inmates liked Mrs. Gore and knew what Proulx had done to her daughter. Detective Reisler realized there was unfinished business with the Proulx investigation. He learned from the CBI in January 1980 that no hair comparison testing had ever been done comparing Proulx's hairs and the hairs found at the crime scene, because the CBI had been waiting for Colorado Springs to give them the go-ahead. So Detective Reisler submitted a formal request for hair analysis. I don't know what happened with this, but I would guess that the hair analysis, which, as we know, was pretty primitive at the time, showed that the hairs could be consistent with Proulx's, because in 1985, Detective Reisler submitted a request to now Detective Sergeant Kenda for expenses to travel to Connecticut to interview Proulx. Proulx had been paroled in March 85 out of the Somerville Correctional Facility in Connecticut. I really don't think this interview ever happened because there is nothing whatsoever about it in the file I received. Over the next several years, the Colorado Springs investigators did some work on the case as leads popped up and suspects reappeared. For example, Matt J., the kid who had called in the false report to the police that other kids were being targeted, was interviewed in 1987 after he was arrested for making sexually explicit phone calls to some woman. Matthew had spent time in a mental facility and his parents had washed their hands of him, but he was adamant that he hadn't killed Maria and didn't know who did. This is the end of Part 1 of the Maria Honzell case. Part 2 is available right now.